second most asked question, and this is not for all those to use technology savvy people here, it was really sort of what we call basic table stakes. How do you get started on using systems? What should we even look at? What's out there that for a shelter or a rescue that doesn't have anything, what would you want to do? And lots of areas of interest here, all the way from how do we put in a shelter management system to how do we just keep track of things. So Mike, you want to start?
Hardware part first.
Greg's going to talk about the hardware, and then Greg always talks about the hardware.
Starting on one end of the spectrum, sometimes we'll hear things as sort of simple and basic as, I don't have Wi-Fi in my shelter, I don't know how I'm going to do it, the cost is exorbitant. And then all the way on the other end of the spectrum, if you're foster-based, everybody has at least a phone or a tablet or a computer, and so the hardware is not the issue, but the connectivity and keeping everybody synced together and on the same page becomes the issue. So speaking to the whole spectrum is going to be difficult here. But we find ourselves frequently recommending to people not to wait for the full budget to come through and the full overhaul and to wire up the whole entire building. Those things cost a fortune. They take forever to get done. There are now ways to build, to buy mobile hotspots and bring Wi-Fi into buildings that isn't already there. We brought Wi-Fi into this room, right? Mm-hmm. These can be run off phones. You can buy dedicated devices for them. But we would sort of typically push people into making smaller hardware decisions just to get things rolling rather than wait for a huge budget to come through and a big overhaul of a facility.
Yeah. Along those lines, just as again, sort of a survey question, we're going to keep asking these very high-tech survey questions with your arms. Who uses Chromebooks in the room? Yeah, I mean that's just one simple example of here's a great piece of hardware that's relatively cheap that can fall into the river or get trampled by a dog. Lose everything you had, and just to always keep that idea in mind. Obviously, the environment's tough on any of our equipment, and we can do a lot with these relatively inexpensive solutions right now.
Just so you know, that is a inexpensive laptop.
Yeah, sorry. So for those of you who didn't raise your hands, it's an inexpensive laptop that only runs, it's pretty web-based kinds of applications, mostly through Google Chrome. In terms of the getting started, we need to set something up to solve X problem side of things. One of the other issues that often seems to come up is we want one platform to do everything. How many people have sort of said that or thought about that before? I think that came up, and it maybe came down a little further down the survey. I think it's worth talking about. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, and I think a lot of the super techie people in the room would, speak to this as much more depth than I can. It's just not going to happen, and that's also okay, because now we can, in a good way, string together tools that really work, say for whatever you might need to do. So if it's communication, and we'll talk about some of these tools with more specifics a little further down the line, but communicating with your staff, managing a project, scheduling stuff, and then stringing all of those tools together with yet another product. The big theme is, what do you need to do? And chances are that problem's already been solved. And as we often say, the solution may not have like a paw print next to it. It might not be an animal welfare specific solution, but it's really important to go into these problems assuming that someone solved this and we can do this. And we'll talk about more of those as we go down the line with these specific areas.
Yeah. If I could just add, there's a price you pay, and some of you may have experienced this, when you do get a one solution does everything thing, and that price is it might not be great at everything, and you're kind of locked in. So it's a back and forth of, do you try to get one thing that does a lot of things, or do you get the best of this and the best of that? And generally generally speaking, technologically, where it's good to have everything housed in one program is when there's important data sharing that's happening. So it's nice to have a donor program that also does email because it's the same world, but you wouldn't expect that program to manage fosters necessarily or do instant messaging. So if you're going to look for a solution that combines things together so you can want one system, look for a solution that's all dealing with the same information, so information lives and touches where it needs to touch.
Yeah, I think very often, so I've been in this business for longer than I want to remember, but when I look for something out there, I always start with a Google search, right? So volunteer management, go out. Okay, there are thousands of those systems. So how do you distinguish what's actually good and what's not good? And I have a deep-rooted distrust in the rating systems like Yelp and so on that I think they're all rigged. So I like to ask friends, right? Ask people that I know have tried this before. This is another commercial for Maddie's Pet Forum coming up here, but it's a good thing.
Have you heard of
ask
Maddie's Pet
people
Forum?
It's not the last one. So it's a good thing to ask people that you know and trust out there. That's actually always good, right? And once you make friends, you meet people in a place like this, and you have conversations about these things. Following up on those conversations and getting their advice is one of the best ways of sort of parting the wheat from the chaff in a search for something good.
And one thing that kept coming up in this discussion as we were talking about this particular topic is look outside of the industry. So this morning we were talking about how Austin Pets Alive uses Trello, and Trello is typically a sort of it was designed to be a software task management tool.
Who uses Trello?
Oh,
Wow.
good.
People have heard of Trello.
Yeah.
So people are using, Austin Pets Alive is using Trello to manage their foster program. Right, so you don't have to look inside the industry for these kinds of solutions. The processes or the problems, the information problems you're trying to solve have been solved somewhere. It might just not be in our industry yet.